Hello, and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we talk about Roman military victories. So, when we left off, we were talking about the Roman Legion. It was a 5,000-man unit. They used swords and shields. Everybody, rich and poor, served so that the army looked like society. And victory was shared in what we call the triumph, where everyone got a share of the spoils, not an equal share. Rome, the city, and the rich got richer. And the poor did all right. But they can lose as well, because people were away. The men were away at war. And so if the farm failed without the husband there, without the older sons there, they could return to a ruined farm, to a lot of debt. And so Rome itself was getting richer. The rich were getting richer. The poor were doing okay with the victories. But they could lose out as well, depending on how long the war went, what kind of war it was. If the husbands got killed in the war, that could ruin the family as well. So now let's combine this with geography. When we talked about political geography, we talked about Rome being surrounded. So they're fighting all the time. They're fighting their neighbors, the other Latins. They're fighting Gauls. They're fighting Etruscans. They're fighting Greeks. They're fighting all the time. And they're getting better militarily. Well, over 300 years, a period of 300 years, they are able to conquer an empire. This is not the Roman Empire. That's when an emperor ran the show. That's later. But the Roman Republic owned an empire. They owned places that weren't Rome. And it takes about 300 years to conquer this. They defeat the Gauls up in the north. And that required bravery and toughness. The Romans had to get tougher. Remember, they had to change. And you may go, oh, well, that's easy. No, it's not. Look at how hard it is for us to change now. It's very hard. I've got grandparents telling me, back in the day, we used to do this and we used to do that, and no one did this and no one did that. And kids today, like, you get this all the time. People don't like change. Societies don't like change. Societies are petrified of change because it's hard. It's different. Young people can do change because they see the problems, because young people usually get screwed by the system. Old people like the system because they made the system. The system was made to benefit them. Because when they were young, they changed things. Remember, old people today, boomers today, were hippies back in the 60s. So they became the me generation. Then they became the okay boomer, conservative old people. Right? That's going to happen to other generations as they go along. You start liberal and you become conservative. And people go, well, that's the way it is. But that's because you changed the society when you were younger to benefit you. And so change for societies is tough because you don't know if it's going to work. So lots of societies go under, get conquered, get crushed, get absorbed instead of changing. We see this all over this class. So defeating the Gauls showed that they got tougher. They needed bravery and toughness. Remember, the Gauls fight naked. They charge in with giant double-handed swords. They light their beards on fire. The Gauls are all about scaring people. They also stand about 6 foot tall, when the Romans stood about 5'3". So they outweighed. Not only were they taller, they were a giant. They also outweighed The Romans by a good 50 pounds of muscle. So, you get this charge from the Gauls. So to fight the Gauls, you had to be brave. You had to stand there and take it. So they got tougher. The Greeks, on the other hand, we've already talked about. The Greeks are smart. The Greeks have their phalanx. The Greeks aren't going to fight stupid battles. You're going to have to learn tactics. You're going to have to learn strategy. You're going to have to lure them into the open. You're going to have to try to get around a Greek phalanx. Like otherwise, they just have their 20-foot spears and just stab you and then laugh at you. And you know how terrible it is that the last thing you hear in your life is a bunch of Greeks laughing at you for being stupid? Like you don't want that. I don't want that. That's terrible. And yet it happened all the time. So, they defeat the Greeks in southern Italy. And so it shows that they're learning tactics, learning strategy. They're getting smarter. They're absorbing knowledge from other people. They're getting tougher and they're getting smarter. The Roman Republic is changing. And that is a great advantage of the Roman Republic. It is willing to change. But Rome is not yet Rome. What makes Rome Rome, the Rome you know in the movies, in your head, the Rome that will become the Rome of Caesar, Rome is the Punic Wars. If the Punic Wars did not happen, Rome is a nice Italian city with a nice little regional empire. It's no different than Ptolemy in Egypt. No, Pontus. No big deal. It is the Punic Wars, the wars against Carthage, that make Rome Rome. So we got to talk about them. So let's talk. First, they go on for about 120 years. Not continuously, but the first one's 20 years long. The second one's 20 years long. The third one's 3 years long, and we'll talk about why. But these are 3 wars for control of the Western Mediterranean. And while they didn't know it at the time, the world. Had Carthage won, they would have dominated the Western Mediterranean. And then they would have eventually come east and probably conquered or beat up other of the Greek states. Or maybe not. Maybe not. They were a trade empire, kind of like the Dutch in the 1600s. So, but this is the war. These 3 wars for control of the Western Mediterranean. So the first war. First war goes on for 20 years, from 261 to like 240. And it's fought to conquer Sicily. Both sides wanted Sicily, and Sicily was rich. Remember, we talked about it in the Peloponnesian War. It was the food supply to Greece. And so it made a lot of money. Well, the Carthaginians wanted it because it made a lot of money, and they, in fact, owned a good portion of it. Some allies called up the Romans. They looked around. Nobody was willing to really help them against the Carthaginians. And so they called up Rome and said, hey, come and help us. Now, here's the thing. We got to go back to the map. Rome is in Italy. Carthage is in today Tunisia in North Africa. So Sicily is right across an inlet from Carthage. So if you're the Carthaginians, you're looking at Sicily on any map and saying, oh, we have to own this. We got to own it. Right? Corsica and Sardinia as well. Now, I know the map we have is by 218. That's going to be after the First Punic War. Before the First Punic War, half of Sicily is Carthaginian. Corsica and Sardinia are basically Carthaginian. So, but you could see, Sicily's between Italy, which was owned by Rome, and North Africa, owned by Carthage. So it made complete sense that this would be the thing that would cause a war between the two of them. So, to get to Sicily, you need to have a navy. Now, we have to talk about this. The Romans are not a sea-going, ocean-going people. The Carthaginians are. They are Phoenician. They are Greek, Hellenistic. They are row, row, row your boat all around the world. They love the ocean. They are taken to the ocean. Carthage is probably the best natural port in the Mediterranean, certainly in the Western Mediterranean. The Romans got seasick looking at a rubber ducky in a bathtub. It bobbing up and down, and they went, whoa, 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 whoa. So this requires a massive change. And they're going to fight for 20 years. And the Romans are going to build like 5 fleets. Because the Romans don't know how to build a fleet. So they build a fleet. And it immediately sinks because, well, they didn't cork it enough. Or they didn't fill it together. It immediately sinks. So they build another one. And this one can't turn and just goes sailing straight. So they build another one. And this one gets wrecked by a storm. And they build another one. And this is the Romans right down to the T. It doesn't matter how many people die. They just keep running their head into the wall till the wall falls down. So you build another navy, you build another navy, you build another navy. And in the end, they are able to finally cross the inlet of Messenia, put a Roman army on Sicily. And once the Roman army is like, oh, two feet on land, I'm good. Then they can win, and they can crush whoever they're fighting. They take the cities, they conquer Sicily. So 1, they build a navy, which is a massive change and requires industries. It requires dockyards. It requires marines. It requires rowers. Remember the rowers in Athens? You get a democracy? That's not going to happen in Rome. In fact, one of the things that is least discussed is the Roman navy. I don't know why. The Roman army has books upon books upon books. And I know there are books about the Roman Navy. But it's interesting that the Roman Navy never creates the democracy for Rome the way it does in Athens. It goes against everything Aristotle talked about. And in fact, the Roman Navy is always second fiddle to the legions of the Navy. So 20 years. It's a hard-fought war. Lots of people die. Rome wins, and they conquer Sicily. And what that means is they now have an empire. They have an empire outside of Italy. What that now means is they have to control Sicily. But they also control the economics. So all that food that used to go to Greece now comes into Rome. And suddenly the Romans have all of this Sicilian wheat that they now can sell and make a lot of money off of. And they go, wait a minute, I like this. I like making money off of conquering places. See, up to this point, they didn't do that. They were fighting for defense. And the Romans will say they always fought for defense. That never changed. They will always fight a defensive war. But up to this point, they're fighting in Italy, and they're fighting other relatively poor people. You know, the Latins are completely poor. The Etruscans aren't poor. Well, everybody in Italy is fairly poor compared to, say, the Greeks. Even the Greeks in Italy, the Greeks in Italy are all right. But they're hardly Ptolemaic. This is not Egypt, right? It's the Romans who will make Italy Italy. So all this money starts coming in. They have to put governors in Sicily. They have to now deal with conquered people that aren't Italian. They will make them Italian, but at the moment they weren't Italian. How do you deal with them? Does the laws cover them? Do the 12 tables cover them? These are all now questions that they never had to deal with before. So, there's another problem. And that problem was how mad Carthage was. Because it was a close-fought war. The Romans basically won by a field goal in like the final 30 seconds. Or if it's March Madness in basketball, a three-pointer near the buzzer. Not at the buzzer, but close to the buzzer. This was not a smash them, decisive victory, done, we crushed them, war, let's take whatever we want. No. This was hard fought between two societies for a very long time that were fairly equal. But the Romans treated it. They treated the victory as if they had won by 6 touchdowns, as if they had won by 40 points, as if they had scored 12 runs in the first inning and, never looked back. They acted like it was a decisive victory. And so we get what's called the Carthaginian peace. The peace treaty of the first war guaranteed there would be a second war because it so angered the Carthaginians that they wanted to fight a second time. Now, what the Romans were trying to do was punish the Carthaginians. How dare you fight against us? We'll give you a lesson. Don't fight against us. Well, the Carthaginians are like, yo, we're equals. You don't get to treat us this way. We're not subservient to you. And so that's Hannibal. And this is going to be the Versailles Treaty. And that's going to get us to World War II. Like, the Versailles Treaty is so harsh on Germany that basically every German person hated it. So Hitler comes to power with his racism, but mostly by promising, I will get rid of that treaty. I will get rid of the treaty with France. I will get rid of the treaty that humiliates us. That's what Hannibal did. And Hannibal, Hannibal, is Rome's greatest enemy. By far. He's the boogeyman. He is the yin to the yang. He is the opposite. And remember, everything we have about Hannibal, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but as far as I know, was written by the Romans, especially this Greek historian called Polybius. And the Romans are going to write about Hannibal as if he's the second coming of Alexander. And because, one, it makes the Romans look better if Hannibal is tougher, right? But two, Hannibal is essentially the only non-Roman who comes close to destroying Rome. In all of this time, in all of these wars, there's one besiegement, there's one sacking of Rome by the Gauls for a summer in like 309. But other than that, there's nobody who comes existentially close to destroying Rome in the Roman Republican period, except for Hannibal. So, what happens? Well, let's go back to our map, because our map is the world on the edge of the Second Punic War. And so we have the Second Punic War. So, one of the things the Romans made the Carthaginians do was pay money, because they lost. And it was like, you lost, you got to pay us money. And it was a lot of money. Now, the Romans thought it would bankrupt Carthage. It would make Carthage, like, poverty-stricken forever. But what it did was force the Carthaginians to create an empire themselves. And they went to Spain. Now, the empire they made in Spain was not conquer, conquer, conquer. It was a lot of allies. The way kind of the British go into India. There's some battles. It's the way Alexander kind of goes into India. He's perfectly willing to get involved with local tribes, local powers, local kings, to make an ally, conquer somebody else, and then that ally becomes part of this Carthaginian empire. And so, this is what Hannibal's father and older brother are doing. They're marrying in. They are awesome. They're marrying in. They're doing lots of cool things. They're like, dude, we're the Carthaginians. And the Iberians are like, You're awesome, no problem. We're totally allies with you. And Iberia, Spain, was immensely rich in metal, gold, silver. And so instead of taking 20, 30 years to pay back this money, they take like 5. And the Romans are like, holy shnikes. 1, we never thought you would pay that back. So, oops. And 2, Spain is rich. What if we conquered that? Then we get rich. And we already beat the Carthaginians once. I think we could do it again. And so what the Romans start to do is make these secret treaties. They make these treaties with these little dinky cities in Spain. And they're like, dude, if Carthage ever attacks you, you call on us. And what they really want to do is invade Spain, have an excuse to invade Spain, conquer Spain, and then make all the money on gold and silver coming out of the mines themselves. They totally think the Carthaginians suck. We're totally going to win. What they didn't understand was there's Hannibal. And Hannibal, I'm a military historian, and Hannibal ranks right up there. I mean, he's top 5. I mean, you got Alexander at 1, right? You got Napoleon at 2. I've got a book by a great British historian whose name escapes me. That is a biography of Scipio Africanus that's called Greater Than Napoleon. Like that's how good Napoleon is, that if you want to make your own general that you're writing about awesome, you had to compare him to Napoleon. So Napoleon gets to be number 2 because Napoleon did lose. Let's be honest about that. So we got Alexander, we got Napoleon. The Duke of Wellington said Napoleon was worth 50,000 troops all by himself. So there's that. Even in his own time, they thought Napoleon was so scary, they put him in they put him in exile on an island in the middle of the South Atlantic. That is literally the farthest you can get in the Atlantic from any place on land, from any continent. I mean, think about that. They put him in a prison as far away from other people as you could possibly get on Earth. That's respect. Anyway, so Hannibal's up there. Because again, Hannibal will come the closest of anybody to defeating Rome. Now, so Hannibal starts this war and he knows a couple of these cities are allied with Rome. He decides he wants to fight Rome, so he attacks those cities. Those cities contact Rome. Rome is like, oh, no problem. We'll get our people on our boats and we'll show up in Spain and we'll kick some butt and we'll win. It'll be like home by Christmas, even though we're not Christians and we don't have Christmas yet. But home by December 25th. So, everything's proceeding there. So they get on their boats and they go across the Mediterranean and they show up in Spain and they go, haha, tell us, where is Hannibal? And they're like, Hannibal? He's left. And like, where did he go? And like, you see those mountains there? He went over those mountains into Gaul. Now, what Hannibal did was he knew the Romans were going to show up in Spain with their big-ass army. And he's like, why would I fight in Spain? That's dumb. I'm going to invade Italy. But I know the Romans have a big-ass fleet, so I can't fight them at sea. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go over the Pyrenees, which is not as big as the Alps, but almost as big. It's been the difference between Spain and France for like literally ever. This is a major mountain range if you've ever seen the Pyrenees, and it doesn't get talked about. The Alps is impressive, but going over the Pyrenees is not nothing. So it's still like, I don't know, going over the Rockies. It's a big deal. So he goes over the Pyrenees, goes into southern Gaul, is marching through southern Gaul, and he's putting out the call. Anybody want to beat up Romans? Anybody want to beat up Romans? And the Gauls are like, oh, they beat up our cousins in Italy. He's like, oh yeah, they did. And you want to join me? And all these Gauls like, yeah, I do. So he's picking up Gauls along the way, right? And then they do the craziest thing of all crazy things. They cross the Alps, the Alpine Mountains, the Alps, the separation between Italy and the continent of Europe in winter. Oh, yeah, and Hannibal still has 36 elephants with him. And this is one of the great quotes of Hannibal, because the Romans are guarding all of because they're worried about Gauls coming over the mountains, so they're guarding all the passes. And Hannibal knows this. And so Hannibal says, we will find a way through the mountains, or we will make one. Oh, man. And so they find a way over the mountains. I don't think people, even today, historians know what his exact path is. There's a couple maps. I've got one in my office of a map of his trek through the mountains. But I don't know if anyone really knows what exact path his army took. And his army suffered. It lost 3/4 of its men. It went into the mountains with 100,000 troops, as big as anything in the world, and came out with like 20 to 30,000 troops and one elephant, Hannibal's elephant, the giant, badass super elephant that was Hannibal's. And the Romans are cool. Romans are fine. Romans are all right. Why? Home field advantage, man. Home field advantage. Now, all right, they have that army in Spain. They'll make another army, and they'll send it up. They send it up to Italy. They're in Italy. They send it up to northern Italy to go beat up Hannibal. They're like, hey, we're on home field advantage. We're Romans. We're Italians. We're going to kick some butt. He came to us. It makes life so much easier. And you know what Hannibal did to that army? Crushed it. So the Romans sent another army. And this one, he crushed even more. He pinned them against, while they were marching, they didn't even know where he was. And he pinned them against a giant lake and then massacred them. They never even got to turn around. Butchered them. So in 2 battles, Hannibal has killed about 50,000 Romans. So the Romans are mad. They say, enough of this. Enough of this terrorist. And they put together the largest army Rome will ever put together anywhere. Now, numbers in the ancient world are always big. But even modern historians are like, it was probably around 60, 70, 80,000 troops. So I use 70,000. But it's more than 50. Because 50 is a typical army is 30. 50 is a big army, but you could do it. This is bigger than that. In the ancient world, this is like the Romans threw everything and the kitchen sink into it. And that is going to be the Battle of Cannae, Cannae in 216. They're going to send 70,000 troops. Now, if you watched the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, you know how it turned out. Hannibal is facing off. Hannibal is 1/3 the size. His troops. They're far from home. They're Carthaginians. They're Africans. They're Gauls. They're Spanish. There's some Greeks. They're a motley crew of military. Now, they're hardcore because they've been following Hannibal for about a year. So they're not a raggedy crew, but they do all these different ways of fighting. But there's 70,000 Romans. These are the guys. They're going to win. They're going to overwhelm him by force. No Roman army anywhere close to this big has ever lost. And so they go charging in. And Hannibal knows this. And he lures them into a trap. He does a fighting retreat from his center. He puts most of his men on his sides. So he makes it's not quite a square. It's think about if it was a box, but at the box you had at the top of the box, the northern part, you made a triangle. And that tip is where Hannibal is, right? And now what happens is that triangle inverts. It starts moving down backwards into the box. It's this fighting retreat. his men, his best men, are fighting the Romans. But as they're retreating, as they're pulling back, as they're slowly backing up, the Romans are being sucked in into that box. Sucked in, right? And the Romans are seeing this. They're seeing the men, suddenly Hannibal's men on their sides, on their right side, on their left side. But they're moving forward. And then the trap is sprung. Hannibal's cavalry comes out of quote-unquote nowhere, comes around the army and seals that box. And what it did was pin 70,000 Romans into a circle where the men in the middle could not fight. They couldn't even pull out their swords. And so you had the guys on the outside fighting while crushing the people on the inside, just like the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones. Like that scene where Jon Snow is barely capable of breathing, that's the Battle of Cannae. That's the best representation of the Battle of Cannae that's probably ever been created. That scene where they're just, the phalanxes on the side are just pushing in. It's estimated by one historian 800 men a minute were being killed. The Carthaginians will butcher all of those men, 70,000 Romans. By the end of that day, 10% of all Roman men were dead. There was probably about 1 million Roman men. Hannibal, in 3 battles, will kill about 1 in 10. That's insane. No society can sustain a defeat the size of Cannae. None. Except the Romans. Hannibal wins. 80 senators go down. We know this because senators wore a special ring. Hannibal will cut them off the dead man's fingers and wear them as a necklace, which will go jingle, jangle, jingle, jangle as he rode his war elephant. 70,000 men, 80 senators. They made in Rome crying illegal in public because they figured if one person starts crying, everyone will start crying. Why? Because everybody lost a son, a father, an uncle, a brother. Maybe more, maybe all. Hannibal was scary. Hannibal is the great enemy of people's dreams. But he couldn't besiege Rome. He didn't have the manpower. He didn't have the artillery. He lost it all over going over the Alps. And nobody, and this is the great thing, none of the Italians came to his aid. He thought, I will crush the Romans, and all these Italians rise up against the Romans, because that's the way it worked everywhere else. That's the way it worked in Greece. That's the way it worked in the Persian Empire. That's the way it worked for Alexander. It's worked for everybody. You crush the guy who's been oppressing people. But remember Natio. Remember the Republic. People had rights in the Roman world. They liked being Roman. They didn't want to lose that. They didn't want to go back to the world where they fought with their neighbors all the time. So Hannibal is waiting for people to come and join him, to ally with him, and nobody comes. And there's a very famous quote, Hannibal, you know how to win victories, but not know how to use them. So Hannibal just sat outside the walls of Rome for a while, and then he goes around pillaging Italy. Now, no Italian woman was going to let her man go fight Hannibal in Italy. That's done. No more. There are no more, for the next 20 years, there is no more battles against Hannibal in Italy. You fight Hannibal, you die. That was proven on 3 different occasions. Hannibal has a 100% win rate in Italy. But it proved Rome must change. And Rome had this advantage of Natio. And they had Natio so they could promise people, stick with us, stick with us, stick with us, and you'll be Roman. We will make you Roman. They just needed a great general. They needed someone who could fight Hannibal. Not in Italy, but who could fight Hannibal somewhere. And they finally found that guy, Scipio, Africanus. Now, Scipio Africanus is the third Scipio. Scipio's father, fighting in Spain. He goes to Spain, and he's fighting, and the Spanish troops are allied to Rome. They're like, yeah, Scipio, you're awesome. Scipio the dad. And Scipio the dad dies in battle. So Rome does what Rome does. They elect a new general, Dougie, and they send him to Spain. And Dougie shows up and goes, hello, I'm Doug. I'm Dougie. And the Spanish troops, who are used to tribes and chiefs and, kin, they're like, Doug, are you Scipio Dougagus? He's like, oh, no, I'm just Doug. I'm not related to Scipio at all. And they're like, what? WTF? We had all these agreements with Scipio the dad. Are you going to abide by those agreements? Well, I didn't really make them, so probably not. And so what do they do to this guy? They strip him naked, humiliate him, put him on a boat, send him back to Rome. You're going to put up with that. So what does Rome do? They find Scipio's son, his eldest son, put him on a boat, send him. He shows up. He goes, hello, I'm Scipio. And they're like, you're Scipio the son? And they're like, yep, I am Scipio the son. I am. And I'm awesome. And they fight. They're like, well, then we're cool. Let's fight. And they join the war, and Scipio the son is kicking butt, and then he dies in battle. Now remember, they're making agreements, they're making alliances. Meanwhile, Hannibal is moving around Italy, wrecking everything, burning farms down, destroying cities, destroying towns. So what does Rome do? It sends Scipio the Younger, Scipio the youngest son. Now remember, in Rome there are huge hierarchical rules. You couldn't be a general till you were 35. Remember, we have the rule about not being president till you're 35. Well, that was the same rule in Rome. You couldn't be a general till you were a certain age. You had to rise up to the ranks. They just skipped all that. They go Scipio the youngest, and he's like, yep, I'm the youngest. And they're like, you're going to Spain. You're like, okay, go to Spain. And he shows up and goes, hi, I'm Scipio the youngest. And they're like, great. Your dad made agreements. Are you going to abide by them? Of course, my dad was awesome. And your older brother made agreements. Are you going to abide by those? Of course, my older brother was awesome. Then great, you're our man. And so he makes alliances with the Spanish troops, and they're fighting the Carthaginian Spanish troops, and boom, boom, they win in Spain. They take all that money. They take those troops. He levels up in Spain. He becomes a great general in Spain. But he hasn't won the war yet. And so he gets on his ships, and he goes to Africa. Parks outside of Carthage. And that's when the Carthaginians send for help to Hannibal. They send out these ships. Now you have to understand, every Roman ship in the world wants to catch these messenger ships. They want to keep Hannibal away from Africa. They want Scipio to attack Carthage, defeat Carthage, win the war, while Hannibal is like having Chianti in Tuscany. So they're all like, every pirate hunter in the world is trying to capture these ships, these Carthaginian ships, and they get through. They get to Italy. They find Hannibal. And they're like, Hannibal, you got to go back to Africa. And Hannibal's like, but what about my men? I have this army. It's 20 years. They're awesome. And like, we can't get them past the Roman Navy. You're going to have to come back by yourself. And Hannibal has a teary goodbye to his troops who have been loyally following him for 20 years in this Roman land in Italy. He says, I'll be back. We're going to finish this. We're going to crush Scipio, and then we'll come back. There will be no more Roman armies, and we'll destroy Rome. And they're like, yeah, Hannibal, we're with you. Except we have to stay in Italy. So what happens? So he gets on the boat. And he starts heading back to Africa. And again, every pirate hunter in the world, every Roman Navy ship, every submarine, everything the Romans have is trying to capture that one ship. They want to kill Hannibal. He is the great prize, that one ship. And this guy evades all of them. He gets back to Carthage, comes in as a freaking hero. And they're like, Hannibal, we are going to give you a whole new army. And he's like, great, that's good, thanks, but how experienced are they? None. Oh boy. So you have Hannibal, who is awesome, versus Scipio, who's pretty good. And Scipio, let's be honest, might be awesome at this point too, but he's never fought Hannibal. So, Hannibal's got the reputation. So, so we got A plus versus like B plus A minus. Let's go with that. Now, I know there's some Scipio fans out there who say, no, it's higher, but Hannibal still had, Hannibal like sneezed in people's general direction and Romans would run away. So Hannibal's problem is he's got this brand new army. It's brand spanking new. It's awesome, but it's never been used before. Those troops have never fought together before. They've never had a battle together. Meanwhile, Scipio's troops have been fighting for 5, 6, 7, 8 years together. They have experience. And what happens? At the Battle of Zama, Scipio wins. He defeats Hannibal. Victory. He gets crowned as Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. Rome is now number 1. Hannibal will escape. He'll go east, where the Romans will send hit squads after him and never capture him. Hannibal is awesome. The Romans think Hannibal is awesome. So that is the greatest war. The Second Punic War is the greatest war fought in Europe, basically until 1648, and basically until the 30 Years' War. It is the longest. It is the biggest. It is, there's Viking stuff and whatnot, but in terms of size and personality and generals and the amount of people involved and the amount of total war, these are two societies completely at war against each other. They're throwing everything at it. It's really till the 30 Years' War is the next great war. That's 2,000 years later. You don't have a war this big in Europe. Spain gets conquered. North Africa gets taken. Sicily completely absorbed, becomes Italian. It's over. All that's left is Carthage. Time passes. And that's how we come to the Third Punic War. Because by this point, there's nobody who can fight against the Romans. In fact, right at the end of the Second Punic War, the Greeks start showing up. And they're like, we declare war on you. And the Romans are like, oh my God, this is so awesome. We're going to defeat Hannibal, and then we're going to go east, and we get to conquer the Greeks. We get to conquer all of the east. So they start conquering the east. They conquer Greece. They conquer Macedon. They start conquering the Middle East. And they're like, dude, we're running out of places to conquer. The one place they don't conquer is Egypt. No one's allowed to conquer Egypt because it's too rich. We'll get to that in a little bit. So they're looking around. The Senate's looking around, and they're like, hey, do you know what Grandpop didn't do? What? What did Grandpop not do? Didn't absorb Carthage. Look, Carthage is still independent. No, it can't be. We defeated them twice. Look at the map. Independent. Oh, that's interesting. It used to be very rich. Maybe we could do something about that. I was on the same as that. And so they launched the Third War against Carthage. Carthage didn't do anything. And this is the war for genocide. The Roman army shows up streams right into the Carthaginian harbor. And the Carthaginians are like, dude, what do? We didn't do anything. And basically, what the Roman general says is, you exist. Well, what are you supposed to do with that? And so it's a genocide. They lay siege to Carthage. It takes them 3 years, but they break in through the walls because the Romans are the number one siege people in the ancient world. They break in, they murder most of the people, they enslave the rest, they pick on the weak. This is the first time we see the Romans be mean. Now, no warfare in the ancient world is nice, but it usually doesn't obliterate other people. That's the Assyrians. Remember how mean the Assyrians were? This is the first time we see the Romans do that. Romans could be mean. Don't mess with us. If you mess with us, something terrible is going to happen to you. The Hebrews are going to find that out. Other people are going to find that out as well. It's so bad that it's such a destruction that the story is they plowed salt in the fields so nothing would grow there again. Now, the Romans will have to rebuild Carthage in 100 or 200 years because it is the natural port in the Western Mediterranean. But think about that. You want to destroy a place. You want to humiliate a place. So you're going to plow salt in the fields so nothing grows there, so no one could ever live there again. You've got to bring the salt. You've got to carry that on horses. You got to bring it on ships. You had to get it in the first place. You had to pay people. Go get me salt. Get me tons of salt. Like, think about how crazy that is. It sounds like, oh, that's mean. But it's a higher level of crazy when you think about all the steps that went in to actually doing it. Then we have to get the farmers. We have to get the salt in their packs. We have to have backpacks made. We have to... Like, that's crazy to do that. It's way more work. But they murdered all of the Carthaginians. Those that didn't murder, they enslaved about 50,000 people, sent them off to Rome. They sold them in a day. Tells you how big Rome got, that they were able to process 50,000 slaves in a day and move them. And the Carthaginians disappear. They cease to be a people. So what are the results? The results are the Republic runs the world. From Italy, they have the greatest army in the world, and that empire brings them wealth. They have conquered Greece, Macedonia, North Africa, Spain. They create one world economy, and that efficiency, all roads lead to Rome, literally ties the world together, and that efficiency makes money because now you're using one weight and measure system. A pound is a pound is a pound everywhere now. You're using one monetary system. A gold coin, a Roman gold coin, or a Roman copper coin is worth the same no matter where you go in the world. Latin becomes the language of politics, the language of economics. You have one world economy. And that's going to reduce all of those inefficiencies of the world being broken up. You also get Greek culture becomes elite Roman culture. Why? Remember the Romans. They knew they were dumb. Remember dumb and weak? They knew they were behind. And so when they conquer the Greeks, they're like, oh my God, the Greeks are so smart. And so elite Romans wanting to show they are better than regular plebeian Romans, patrician Romans wanting to be better than plebeian Romans start being like, oh, I'm Greek. I'm smoking Greek cigarettes. I'm speaking in Greek. I am watching Greek theater. Ha 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 ha. And so you get Stoicism, Aristotle, Plato, philosophy. You start to get plays. Romans don't do plays. Romans aren't actors. Romans are warriors. Romans kick butt and take names even when they don't have any more names to take. They're still kicking it. Plays? That's what Greeks do. Lazy-ass Greeks who got conquered. Now they're going to bring in Greek plays and play them in Greek. Greek language becomes the language of education. They're going to hire And then they don't hire. They enslave Greek professors, move them to Rome, plop them down, and like, you're going to teach my kids how to be Greek. And the professor's like, all right, are you going to let me free one day? And they're like, yeah, of course. Once you teach our kids, you'll be free. We'll set you up in business. This is what manumission was. We'll set you up in business. Then you could be a tutor, teach other elite kids how to be Greek, and we get like 20%. And that guy says, great, that's awesome. So Latin becomes the language of war, of politics, of economics, of law. Look at it still today. Our legal system is Latin-based. Greek becomes the language of education. It becomes the language of high culture. What we're going to do next is the collapse of the Roman Republic. So I told you some cool stories. You got to look up what happens to Hannibal. It's awesome. But in our next episode, we're going to talk about how this all fell apart. And fell apart quickly. Within 100 years of defeating Carthage, Romans are murdering each other in large numbers. All right. That's what we're doing next. Be safe. Stay healthy. Take care. See you next time.